Should young single women be using their finances to save for a future family? Let's talk about it. Before we get started, I really want to give a context for the culture that we live in and maybe some of the subcultures that are inside that broad culture to really gain an understanding of kind of like finances and also women, especially women who are single women. But if you are like me and you are a Christian woman, and I at one point was, of course, a single Christian woman, my perspective was a little bit different, and that definitely is going to impact what we have to talk about here today, is because as Christian women, we want to be able to discern between, we are called to live this set apart life from culture, but at the same time, we don't want to live such a set apart life that we are just not involving ourselves ever in culture in amoral ways at all. For these women who are single women, there is a precedent from culture that is kind of pushed upon them. And this is both women and sometimes even men. But this is like young girls that are being pushed. This is people in like 5, 6, 7 years old in daycares, in schools. Like, this is kind of the message that's being pushed from the media. And that is that your goals in life, your dreams for success should look a certain way. And in our culture right now, that dream of success is like, maybe you are married, maybe you are, right? But within that, your goal and your success is defined by your job or your career and how you're building that, and whether it aligns with what you're good at and what you're naturally talented at. Now, I am all about helping people and encouraging people to use their talents, and especially as a Christian, encouraging women to use their talents for the Lord is super, super important. However, our culture takes it kind of a step further and really just encourages women, and sometimes men too, in this culture to kind of just push for yourself. And like, if you enjoy doing something, that has to be your dream, right? Is like, if you enjoy painting, like that's what your dream is, until all of a sudden you enjoy something else, and then that's what your dream is. And that's how it's kind of portrayed in the media and in culture, is like, that is what your goal is. And yes, you can find love on the side, and yes, you can, have a great relationship, but that's kind of like a side step to your ultimate goal, which is to please yourself, to live for yourself, to follow your dreams, follow your heart. As Christian women, we know that this whole mantra of following your heart is really not at all rooted in God's word, that God encourages us to live a life of self-sacrifice, that God encourages us to truly love one another and to love our members of the body in our churches, to be there for one another. And that really true joy and genuine happiness can come from serving others. And the way we were built was to be in community with one another. And part of that is being able to contribute to each other. And sometimes that's, in an unpaid way, but sometimes that can be in a paid way, and getting to contribute our talents and our skills, both to God's work and to the general society. However, as Christian women, we also know that relationships are not less important, but that actually our relationships that we have with others are more important than our own selfish desires. And so, right, so we want to use our gifts to be able to build relationships, and that is kind of like the goal, is the relationship with someone else, whether that's a parent-child, whether that's a husband-wife, whether that's a friend. And so, or between us and God. And so with that understanding of like, okay, our gifts and our skills, they're great, but they're not just so that way we can hog them to ourselves and like bring ourselves this like sort of satisfaction, but it's also so that way we can have and build better relationships with others. for the majority of history, we've always understood, especially in these recent years, that like, yes, you have a career, but the purpose that you maybe have that career, it changes with time, especially as a woman, and depending on your relationships. And the whole point of having a job or a career or some sort of thing that you're doing outside of your household is so that way your relationships within your household are enriched by that. And so you aren't neglecting the people in your household or your friends or your family or the people that you love to the detriment of them by going out and, just chasing your own dream. But you are still able to use that gift to, maybe it's bring in money, and that's the benefit that you get to bring, or you're using that gift to, help others. Whatever the case might be, the focus is more so on this relational aspect. Now, within that, I think that there are a lot of single women, especially Christian women, who do desire marriage. They desire that type of relationship with someone, and maybe that hasn't happened and God hasn't granted that desire of their heart yet, or perhaps they haven't gone out of their way to speak to guys or to develop relationships with people in that way, and so that's just not at the point that they're at, which is a totally okay point to be. However, the majority of women are going to get married, and the majority of women are probably also going to have children. If you're not going to get, even if you're coming from an unchristian viewpoint and you're like, okay, well, I don't want to get married, I'm going to leave that be. As someone that I listen to quite often, her name is Suzanne Banker. She talks about how biologically most women, about the time they reach 30 or before that or sometime around that, within their 20s or 30s, they realize biologically, like, I desire to have children. The majority of women, now that's not all, but the majority do. And so understanding that biologically we are wired to nurture and give birth, and that does look different based on different personalities, because of that desire to kind of give birth and nurture. Most women may not start out with that kind of perspective of, oh, I want to have babies. Like, that's kind of a maybe someday type of option in their mind. And because of the culture and the messages that we get from the culture pressuring us to basically put our full worth into our dreams and into our goals that are outside of our relationships. So, maybe it's career, maybe it's a job, maybe it's, helping the poverty in Africa. Whatever those goals are outside of our regular relationships and our closest relationships, that's where we're supposed to put our effort, and that's where we're supposed to be putting our money, or working towards our money, or putting our time, effort. There's a lot of different variables that could come into play. But because of that perspective from the culture, a lot of women actually aren't, to the best of my knowledge, many women, even when they're young, even when they're older, aren't necessarily saving up money to prepare for being a part of a family. I've noticed many teenage girls, many college girls, many girls who are in their 20s, like they are ready to get married, and yet with their finances, they are actively choosing to put their money towards things that are very current. Their clothes, their coffee, whatever's happening now. And that's not necessarily wrong. But I do think that there is a bigger perspective here that we can have at play. And that is saving, if you do desire marriage, and many, many women do, if you do eventually desire, I want to become a mom, I want to get married, a smart decision that you can start making now, whether you're in your 20s, whether you're single, whether you're married, whether you are in your teens, whether you are literally 5 years old and somehow listening to this podcast, which I would assume you are not, but you can start saving for your future family now. And that can be a huge, huge benefit that you bring, especially in this world that we live in right now, which is very tough economically for people. And I think what most women don't understand is they're kind of like, you know what? Once I get there, then I'll plan financially. Then maybe I'll hope that the government pays me for my leave, or then maybe I'll hope that my employer pays me for my leave, or whatever the case might be. And then they sit there and they hold that baby in their hands and they're like, what was I thinking? I don't want to go back. But they've set up their whole life. They've chosen a husband based on all of these presuppositions that they thought that they wanted, and now they've realized that it's not as important to them as what they thought it was. So I would encourage, even for women who desire to kind of have that mentality of, I just want to follow my own dreams, I want to be a boss babe. Like, maybe you're just a Christian woman who you're like, okay, I want to be a nurse and I want to help other people in this profession, and yes, still earn money for myself, of course, but you're not sitting there like acting like, oh, I just want to, do this because it helps me, or like move up this career ladder because, I want to look successful. But you're truly doing it because you want to help others and you want to be able to be a blessing, and you also want to be able to provide for yourself. And those are very valid options. And maybe some of you, maybe you don't desire a family one day. I would still encourage women like you, the ones who do desire marriage and motherhood, and the ones who maybe that's not in the cards for them, I would still encourage some element of financial literacy, some element of saving that you are looking for growth in and of yourself. Because at the end of the day, right, your future self is going to thank you a lot more if you've prepared, at least in small ways, if you've prepared to help set your future self up for success. So whether you're single, whether you're married, I think that setting yourself up for success, especially when you're single, is choosing to save up money and put away money for a future that potentially could have a family in it. And maybe that's just a husband, maybe it isn't children, maybe it is. Depending on what God has for you or what you decide to choose. But I think it's still very wise to set yourself up for success, right? We talk about, in the financial world, they talk a lot about setting yourself up for success for retirement, setting yourself up for success for paying for a house. Like, these are all very important things that we need to be thinking about. And part of those important things is setting yourself up for success for your family. For most women, that might just look like putting in a couple $100s a month towards a fund that they're like, I don't know what this is going to be for necessarily, but this is for my future family. And it might end up being like, okay, this is our emergency fund money, or okay, this is going towards our house, because those are very beneficial things that your family's gonna need at some point in the future. Maybe you're already fully funded right now for your emergency fund. It's all set, it's good, it's prepared, but in the future, you might need a bigger emergency fund. In the future, you might need, to buy a house. And so I think that going back, even if you are single, and especially if you're single and desire a family eventually, saving up in some sort of fund for your future self, not necessarily just for a house, but for a family in general, is very important and very beneficial. And I really do think that for the majority of women, your future self will look back and be absolutely so grateful to you. In general, I love talking about financial literacy. I think there are so many ways that you can set yourself up well for success. And obviously, people have different situations and are in different circumstances in life. I'm generally talking to married people because that's where I'm currently at. But when I was single, I was at the same place that many single women were at in desiring marriage and yet not being married yet. And I desired it for my future at the very least. I didn't necessarily want it right then. Like, you're 16 and you're like, okay, great, I want to get married in the future, but not right now. But I still did. I put the money away and I was like, in my mind, I'm like, okay, this is for my family. This is for my family. And it has been very beneficial. even though it wasn't a ton because I was in high school working and then I was in college, working over the summers and stuff. But it has turned out to be very beneficial for my future family. And I'm very grateful that I set myself up for success. And there are some ways I probably could have done even better, but like I said, there are still ways that it's absolutely great to live in the moment, spend on that ice cream or whatever, but while also still having a front-forwarded mind towards the future. I hope this helped you clarify a couple things and understand a couple more things about finance. I graduated with a degree from financial planning from Liberty University, and so I love talking about finance, and that's kind of part of what I share on here. But ultimately, we talk about living an intentional life rooted in God's word, whether that's in your finances, your faith, your motherhood, your wifehood, your singleness, all the stages. If you enjoyed this episode, I would encourage you to go ahead and give it a like and subscribe if you'd like to see more content like this.